Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the first in what I believe will be a 4 or 5 part series as we journey through Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. We're going to do, this is the first in the Let's Read series on the novel. We're going to break it up into part 1, part 2, and part 3, very much as Stephen King himself has done. And as part 1 itself is 232 pages and covering a lot of ground, we've got to get started. 232 pages is more than many of the book reviews that have been done on this channel. But that aside, where are we with the story? What we have so far is Dan Torrance, Dan now, not Danny, because as we all know, adults can't be Danny or Billy or Bobby or any of those things. He has to be Dan, is a dirtbag and a drifter. But he has found himself a bit of a home in New Hampshire where he works at a nursing home and helps older people pass away. In story 2, Rattlesnake Andy has some type of possibly shining related powers. I'm not exactly sure how these powers work or exactly what they are, but she has them, and she has joined a group of similarly endowed individuals who call themselves the True Knot. And they are also drifters, like Dan. And they feed on the shining, which is a bit strange because it seems that they feed on the shining, not powers similar to the ones they have, which don't seem explicitly shining related. For example, Danny is able to make people pass out. Now, perhaps it will be explained later, or it has been and I missed it, how those things intertwine or exactly what they are, if it's just... Because Andy seems to have some type of mind control power, as opposed to mind reading or future seeing or ghost seeing power. Anyhow, finally we have young Abra Stone, which is the third story that King appears to be weaving together in this novel. She is just a child, but seems even more gifted than Danny was at that age, as she is already performing feats of great telekinetic strength, as well as casting force projections to many, many miles away. Which leads me to predictions, right? Where it seems the story is going. And what it seems to be setting up for is some great standoff between Dan, who will be protecting Abra, against the True Knot, during which time, in true Jurassic Park fashion, the T-Rex in the room, known as Andy, will have a change of heart and save Dan, and Abra from the Velociraptor True Knot. Obviously Dan is sort of the dirtbag type individual that Andy has made basically a career, if you will, out of putting down, and Abra would be a young woman who would be very symbolic of Andy in her younger life. Now, I hope that is not where this is going, because Stephen King is an author who gets much flack for the fact that he does not know how to end a novel. Some of his novels just stop, and some of his novels have a very good ending, good, solid ending. And then you read 120 more pages where they have a mediocre type ending. And then you read 80 pages and they get a bad ending. So for King to make some transfer from being an author who doesn't really know how to end a novel into an author who ends a novel very predictably from, I believe, a little bit less than 1/3 of the way through would be upsetting. But we have a lot of other ground left to cover, sort of along those notes. I am not a Stephen King fan. That said, that I do not particularly like Stephen King. This novel is a great reminder of how easy it is to sort of be all right with Stephen King. If you pick up a King novel and you say, I'm going to go ahead and give it a few pages, you're going to end up finishing it. As a dedicated reader anyway. They're so long that I think there's a lot of readers who don't end up finishing them and understanding that King doesn't know how to finish a novel because it's a lot of work. But if you are a dedicated reader and you have the discipline in your life to sit down and read and make an effort of it, you're going to finish his novels because there's nothing particularly trying or complicated along the way. And in fact, he is a storyteller in the storytelling sense, if that makes sense. The whole time you're reading a Stephen King novel, you can imagine Stephen King sitting across from you telling you that story, as opposed to, for example, I use this example way too much, but Hemingway. Hemingway tries to disappear through those pages. He tries to put a buffer between the two of you. Or Faulkner, who you feel someone talking to you during Faulkner's work, but it is not William Faulkner. In As I Lay Dying, each one of those characters is so unique that you feel them looking you in the eye and telling you their account of what is going on. Versus Stephen King's novels, where you kind of feel him sitting across from you down in a brewski and slapping you on the shoulder every once in a while to make sure you're paying attention. Moving along, some things to watch in this novel to try to pick up on maybe a deeper meaning, maybe what Stephen King is trying to do. But again, with Stephen King, one of the things that keeps him possibly out of the realm of literary author is that he seems to set he puts a lot of things in the air. He's juggling a lot of balls, and a lot of times he just doesn't catch them. For example, Carrie seemed very thematically close-knit. As you get to something like The Shining, there's a lot going on in that novel that may or may not come to a conclusion, and I'll be damned if I could ever figure it out. There's something with colors. There's man versus nature. There's man-made versus nature-forged. There's masculine versus feminine. There's the idea of ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. There's a lot of things that happen in that novel that might not necessarily... There's a lot of questions raised and very few answers given, if I can put it that way. And in this novel, there's a lot made of events like 9/11. And 9/11 is mentioned explicitly as the true knot dined on that day. However that happens, or whatever that means, whatever is transpiring there. But there are also twins named P and Pod, and the way that they are brought up, I am wondering if they are made to represent 9/11, the Twin Towers, or what exactly is going on that day. And with those characters. Number two of things that I would like to watch, how do AA meetings reflect the True Knot? The True Knot is a group of individuals who come together for the explicit purpose of dining, for the explicit purpose of living in that way that they have to live. They are drawn together by the dirt it is that they do. How does that reflect upon an AA meeting, which are a group of people that come together in order to survive by avoiding the dirt that they do? It is an interesting parallel, and by the placement of some of the scenes where we jump from the True Knot to an AA meeting with Dan, I think that it's possible that King's playing with those ideas, and I want to see how that comes to fruition. Number 3 of the 4 things that I want to watch, does Conchetta have The Shining? Much is made of the fact that The Shining is passed down in the family. Conchetta seems to be, I think that's how you say her name. I'm hoping that's how you say her name, and I'm not just making a giant ass out of myself. But much is made of the character of Conchetta with relation to Abra and how Abra's parents constantly go to the grandmother figure. And finally, on 227, we get this quote. Tell you what, if they don't murder me with their knives and forks tomorrow morning, I guess I'm going to owe you my life. And I wonder if this is a foreshadowing that the true knot will dine on Billy while he's at the hospital. Billy being Danny's friend that he met along the way, who has some semblance of the Shining. So it makes me wonder if that is the fate which he will succumb to. For praise so far in the novel, praise of what King has done through 232 pages, I think that it is a nice and interesting and immersive callback that Abra was born with a caul on her face in the same way that Danny was. It is one of those small things that just through its mention takes you back to a lot of the things that you read and experienced and saw and felt in the first novel. So I think that that was something that was a very good small nod, which paid dividends through the reading experience. The death scene on page 168, which is a lengthy quote, but I'm going to do my best to get through it. I'm not scared of hell. I lived a decent life, and I don't think there's such a place anyway. I'm scared there's nothing. He struggled for breath. A pearl of blood was swelling in the corner of his right eye. There was nothing before. We all know that. So doesn't it stand to reason that there's nothing after? But there is. Dan wiped Charlie's face with the damp cloth. We never really end, Charlie. I don't know how that can be or what it means. I only know that it is. Can you help me get over? They say you can help people. Yes, I can help. He took Charlie's other hand as well. It's just going to sleep. And when you wake up, you will wake up. Everything is going to be better. Heaven? Do you mean heaven? I don't know, Charlie. The power was very strong tonight. He could feel it flowing through their clasped hands like an electric current, and cautioned himself to be gentle. Part of him was inhabiting the faltering body that was shutting down, and the failing senses. Hurry up, please. That were turning off. He was inhabiting a mind. Hurry up, please. It's time. That was still as sharp as ever, and aware it was thinking its last thoughts. At least as Charlie Hayes. The bloodshot eyes closed, then opened again, very slowly. Everything's all right, Dan said. You need sleep. Sleep will make you better. Is that what you call it? Yes, I call it sleep, and it's safe to sleep. Don't go. I won't. I'm with you. So he was. It was his terrible privilege. Charlie's eyes closed again. Dan closed his own and saw a slow blue pulse in the darkness. Once, twice, stop. Once, twice, stop. Outside, the wind was blowing. Sleep, Charlie. You're doing fine, but you're tired, and you need to sleep. I see my wife. The faintest of whispers. Do you? She says there was no more. Just a final blue pulse behind Dan's eyes, and a final exhalation from the man on the bed. Dan opened his eyes, listened to the wind, and waited for the last thing. It came a few seconds later. A dull, red mist that rose from Charlie's nose, mouth, and eyes. This was what an old nurse in Tampa, one who had about the same twinkle as Billy Freeman, called the gasp. She said she had seen it many times. Dan saw it every time. It rose and hung above the old man's body, then it faded. Dan slid up the right sleeve of Charlie's pajamas and felt for his pulse. It was just a formality. That quote there, that scene there, that imagining of the end of a life, that imagining of the expiration of one existence into the beginning of another, that shows Stephen King at his full height. And moving right along, another fairly long quote. This is after a run-in that Dan has with another individual in the novel, and he is struggling with his not wanting, to go back to drinking. Dan went back to his room and back to bed, but he couldn't sleep. He had made roughly 4 deathbed visits during his time at Rivington House, and usually they left him calm. Not tonight. He was still trembling with rage. His conscious mind hated that red storm, but some lower part of him loved it. Probably it went back to the plain old genetics, nature triumphing over nurture. The longer he stayed sober, the more old memories surfaced. Some of the clearest were of his father's rages. He had been hoping that Carling would take him up on it, would go outside into the snow and wind, where Dan Torrance, son of Jack, would give that worthless puppy his medicine. God knew he didn't want to be his father, whose bouts of sobriety had been the white-knuckle kind. AA was supposed to help him with anger, and mostly it did, but there were times, like tonight, when Dan realized what a flimsy barrier it was. Times when he felt worthless, and the booze seemed like all he deserved. At times like that, he felt very close to his father. If the previous quote does not show King at his full height, this most certainly does, and this is why you were told to write what you know. The verisimilitude here does not bring back memories. It puts you right in that place. If you have struggled with anything, the place where comfort and addiction and feeling bad and knowing that feeling bad is the way it's supposed to be because you're garbage, and that is the place where those are all the same. This quote takes you to that place. It puts you right there, and kudos. Just some final notes before some literary questions. On page 86, we get this quote. It had just been The Shining, producing one of its vivid, unsettling, and usually senseless visions. It was always stronger when he'd been sober for a little while, but never as strong as it had been since coming to Frasier. This is the first reference that I remember, that I could see, that links sobriety and suffering from The Shining. The more you are sober, the more you suffer from it. And I wonder, is this why Jack drank so much? Did Jack suffer from The Shining? I don't remember if in that first novel we get any hint or idea that he had suffered from The Shining before he was in the hotel, and if that was a part of his life. If you do know that and you do remember that he did, please leave it in the comments below, because I would love to explore that. I hope that King gets there in this novel. Is The Shining something that Dan inherited from his father, or were the occurrences in the hotel just so strong that they transformed a normal life that Jack had had, even if he was an alcoholic and abusive, into suffering from The Shining, if that's what was going on there. And there is a quote on page 176. This is just an oddity. from 176, which begins, the True Knot wasn't incorporated, but if it had been, certain side-of-the-road communities in Maine, Florida, Colorado, and New Mexico would have been referred to as company towns. These were places where all the major businesses and large plots of land could be traced back through a tangle of holding companies to them, the True's towns. And the colorful names like Dry Bend, Jerusalem's Lot, Ori, and Sidewinder were safe havens, but they never stayed in those places for long. Mostly they were migratory. If you drive the turnpikes and main traveled highways of America, you may have seen them. Maybe it was on I-95 in South Carolina, somewhere south of Dillon and north of Santee. Maybe it was on I-80 in Nevada, in the mountain country west of Draper, or in Georgia, while negotiating, slowly if you know what's good for you, that notorious Highway 41 speed trap outside of Tifton. That quote and the beginning of chapter 5 there, titled The True Knot. I've seen many interviews with King before this novel was published, where I believe he introduces this as the beginning of the novel, which would mean that is where he started writing. So it is interesting to me as a writer that that happens on page 176 of the novel, and how much went into drafting before that. Finally, the literary insights possibly from these first 232 pages. Disasters and the miraculous as a pair. The True Knot dined on 9/11. They mention hurricanes, and they rued that they did not get closer to Joplin, Missouri during that tornado that tore through the town, through those events. So it is interesting to me. Is it particle physics where they say that matter and antimatter come into existence at the same time, and normally they just collapse into one another and nothing happens? I wonder if this is sort of along those lines. For the light to be appreciated, the dark must occur. For something like the True Knot to exist, Dan saving Abra, probably sacrificing his life, those things balance out. So it's an interesting commentary. And the final observance that I will be looking for going forward, the theme of fathers and the hereditary nature of fault or sin is outright mentioned several times. But between Abra's mother, there seems to be a lot being made of masculinity, of how we inherit the sins of our fathers, of men can be real sons of bitches. That's why Andy's story is the way that Andy's is. That's why Danny's story is the way that Danny's is, because their fathers had these negative influences on them. There seems to be a lot made of that outright, that King is putting those things on paper. But between Abra's mother Lucy, Conchetta, Rose, and Andy, and Dan's fling with Deanie meaning so much, there seems to be a lot to be made of femininity and or motherhood. So it seems like King is making that posit of masculinity, but making the point of femininity. And perhaps there is some meta connection to be made between that and the disastrous and miraculous as a pair, the male destructive force and the female nurturing force, and how those things intertwine and necessitate each other as well as make the other possible. But I am not 100% sure, and only being 232 pages into this, there is quite a bit of time for King to make that point and bring that full circle if he so desires and chooses to do. So that is it for the first in a 3-part Let's Read series and a 4 or 5 probably part series on Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. Like if you like this sort of thing, and subscribe if you like this sort of thing and have not yet done so. If this is your first time on this channel, because Stephen King seems to draw so much of a crowd, I hope to see you in further installments of this series. Thank you.